Congratulations, failure. We're done. He mocked me with his wealthy friends at my birthday dinner. Calmly, I slid my small gift across the table and said, "Explain to your sisters why their tuition vanishes, to your parents why their house and cars disappear in minutes, and to your partners why the company collapses before dessert." I stood, and the panic began. What kind of person serves divorce papers at his wife's birthday party? My mother had asked 2 weeks earlier when I called her, crying about the humiliation I knew was coming. But she was asking the wrong question. The right question was, what kind of person spends 6 months secretly preparing to destroy everything her husband values while pretending to be the devoted wife he expects? The answer sat at the far end of the table at Antonio's, watching Ethan perform for his sycophants, my hand resting on the envelope that would answer both questions in exactly the way he deserved. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I arrived at that moment, you need to understand the perfect illusion I'd maintained for years. That morning, 2 weeks after my mother's call, I woke at 5:30 a.m., as I had every day for 8 years. Ethan lay on his side of our California king bed in our Bethesda home, turned away from me, even in sleep. The space between us might as well have been an ocean. I studied his back for a moment, recalling when he used to pull me close in those drowsy morning minutes before the day began. Now, he hugged the edge of the mattress as if he might catch something if he accidentally touched me. Our 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom house with a 3-car garage was silent as I made my way to the kitchen, filled with the symbols of success Ethan needed the world to see. The marble countertops were cold under my palms as I prepared his morning coffee with scientific precision. Ethiopian blend from a boutique roaster in Georgetown, 15 seconds in the grinder, not 14, not 16. Water heated to exactly 195 degrees Celsius. I'd learned the hard way that anything less than perfection earned me that particular frown he'd mastered, the one that said I was disappointing him again. While the coffee brewed, I arranged his breakfast on the Wedgwood china his mother gave us for our 5th anniversary. Egg white omelet with organic spinach, no salt. 1 slice of whole grain toast with exactly 1 teaspoon of almond butter, spread edge to edge. Fresh squeezed orange juice in a crystal tumbler, positioned precisely 2 inches from the plate's edge. These were the kinds of details that seemed loving unless you realized they were terms of an unspoken contract where my value was measured in flawless performances. Ethan appeared at 6:45, his internal clock as precise as everything else in his life. His charcoal Tom Ford suit hung perfectly on his 39-year-old frame, his Harvard Business School class ring catching the morning light. He sat at the kitchen island without acknowledging me, immediately, absorbed in his phone. "The investor meeting is at 10 Horse," he said, without looking up. "Be there by 9:45 to set up the conference room." "Of course," I replied, maintaining the neutral tone I'd perfected. What I didn't say was that I'd spent 3 hours the previous night debugging the algorithm that made those impressive returns possible. The Pythia algorithm was my creation, born from my MIT doctorate in computational finance, nurtured through countless sleepless nights of coding and testing. But in Ethan's world, I was just the woman who arranged papers and served coffee, while he explained my work to rooms full of men who pretended to understand it. 3 hours later, I stood in Pinnacle Capital's glass conference room in Arlington, arranging leather portfolios at each seat, while Ethan tested the presentation clicker. 20 investors would arrive soon, men with more money than imagination who relied on Ethan to make them richer. They'd never know that the mathematical models he'd present, the revolutionary predictive analytics that consistently beat market expectations by 12%, originated in my mind, not his. "Remember," Ethan said, adjusting his tie in the reflection of the window overlooking the Potomac River. "Your administrative support if anyone asks. We don't want to confuse the narrative." The narrative. That was what our marriage had become. A carefully constructed story where Ethan Carter was the brilliant financial mind who'd built pinnacle capital from nothing, while I was the fortunate woman who'd married well. Never mind that I'd written every line of code that made our trading platform work. Never mind that I'd spent years developing algorithms that could predict market micro-movements with uncanny accuracy. The investors filed in, shaking Ethan's hand with reverence reserved for someone who could multiply their wealth. I served coffee from the silver service, invisible as furniture, while Ethan launched into his presentation. He explained the Pythia algorithm's latest refinements with the confidence of someone who understood it, though I knew he'd memorized my explanations like lines in a play. The neural network processes approximately 12,000 data points per second, he said, clicking to a slide I designed at 2 a.m. Our proprietary machine learning model adapts in real time to market volatility. One investor, a sharp-eyed man named Sullivan from a Maryland hedge fund, raised his hand. How does the algorithm account for irregular trading patterns during after-hours sessions? Ethan's smile never wavered, but I saw the micro pause, the brief flicker of panic before he deflected. Excellent question. Let's table that for our technical deep dive next quarter. Now, about those returns. I stood by the coffee service, my hands steady despite the urge to answer Sullivan's question. The algorithm used a hybrid approach, combining pattern recognition with anomaly detection, specifically calibrated for low-volume trading periods. I could have explained it in 30 seconds. Instead, I refilled water glasses and remained silent. That evening, we drove to Ethan's parents' estate in Potomac for our weekly family dinner. The Carter estate sprawled across 3 acres of manicured perfection, whispering old money, though Ethan's father had earned his fortune in commercial real estate just 20 years ago. Evelyn Carter greeted us at the door, air-kissing Ethan while barely acknowledging me. "Lauren, dear," she said, the dear dropping like an ice cube into warm water. "You can put the wine in the kitchen." The dining room was set for 8. Ethan's sisters, Olivia and Chloe, were already there with their boyfriends, both law students from the right families. Conversation flowed around me rather than through me, discussing vacation properties and investment opportunities that assumed I had nothing to contribute. "Olivia's engagement party is next month," Evelyn announced over the pot roast. "The country club, of course. Senator Thompson's son deserves nothing less." "How wonderful," I said. "Can I help?" Carter Sr. laughed, cutting me off. "Lauren, sweetheart, just focus on keeping my son happy. Let the women who understand these things handle the party planning." The women who understand these things, as if I hadn't been secretly managing their investment portfolios for 2 years, guiding them toward returns that funded this lifestyle. They had no idea their trusted financial advisor, whom Carter Sr. bragged about at the golf club, was forwarding everything to me for analysis and strategy. That night, after the Carter family dinner, I lay awake replaying his father's dismissive laughter while Ethan snored beside me. The clock on my nightstand glowed 3:47 a.m. when I gave up on sleep and went downstairs to make chamomile tea. The kitchen felt different in the darkness, less like a stage for my wifely duties, and more like a space where I could think. I sat at the island with my laptop, intending to review code, but instead found myself looking at photos of my mother on Facebook. She'd posted about her book club meeting, sitting with friends in someone's modest living room in Indiana, all looking genuinely happy in a way I hadn't felt in years. The next morning brought another performance. Ethan sat at his usual spot at the breakfast counter, scrolling through his phone while I set down his perfectly prepared plate. I'd been thinking about my mother's upcoming surgery, how she'd be alone in her small apartment, managing with a walker. "I need to visit Mom next week," I said, pouring his coffee. "Her hip replacement is scheduled for Thursday." Ethan didn't look up. That woman still lives in a rental, doesn't she? At 62, it's embarrassing. That woman. Not my mother. Not the person who'd raised me alone after Dad died. I felt my jaw tighten as I set the coffee pot down harder than necessary. She's having major surgery. Ethan. She needs someone there. Then send money for a nurse. We can't have you disappearing to Indiana right now. The Morgan Stanley presentation is coming up. He waved his hand dismissively, still staring at his phone. Then something on the screen made him smile, a real smile, not the practiced one he used for clients. His thumb moved quickly, typing a response to whatever caused that joy I hadn't seen directed at me in months. When he noticed me watching, he quickly deleted the message and set the phone face down. Actually, I should head in early today, he said, abandoning his half-eaten breakfast. Nathan Brooks is coming by to discuss some technical restructuring. Nathan Brooks. The name sent a warning signal through my mind, but Ethan was already heading upstairs to grab his briefcase. I heard the garage door open and close, leaving me alone with his cold eggs and my growing unease about that deleted message and sudden smile. 3 days later, I was in our home office performing the quarterly backup of Pinnacle Capital's files. Ethan insisted we maintain personal copies of everything, paranoid about server crashes or cyber attacks. The external drives hummed as terabytes of data transferred, and I usually use this time to review code, checking for bugs or optimization opportunities. But this time, a folder caught my attention. Restructuring how confidential Q3. My finger hovered over the mouse before clicking. Inside were documents dated 3 weeks ago that made my blood run cold. A draft press release announced Nathan Brooks as Pinnacle Capital's new Chief Technology Officer, not consultant, not advisor, but CTO, my role, or what it should have been if I'd ever been acknowledged. The organizational chart showed Ethan at the top, Nathan directly below him, and 3 new partners from his Princeton Eating Club filling out the executive team. My name appeared nowhere, not even in the footnotes or appendix. The final document was worse. A memo titled Operational Efficiency Initiative outlined plans for streamlining operations by eliminating redundant positions. Redundant. 8 years of building every technical system that made Pinnacle Capital function, and I was redundant. At the bottom, in Ethan's distinctive handwriting, was a note. Implementation after Q2 personal matter resolved. Personal matter. Is that what I'd become? My hands shook as I copied everything to a hidden partition on my personal laptop. The quarterly backup continued its progress bar crawl while I absorbed the reality that my elimination had been planned, documented, and scheduled like any other business transaction. 2 days later, I needed air and grabbed lunch at a small cafe near Pinnacle's office building in Arlington. I rarely ate out alone, but the walls of our house felt like they were closing in. The place was crowded with the usual financial district lunch crowd. I had just ordered a sandwich when Sarah Bennett, Ethan's secretary, walked in with another woman I didn't recognize. They sat directly behind me, close enough that I could smell Sarah's overpowering perfume. I pulled out my phone, pretending to read while hitting record. So, the birthday surprise at Antonio's is all set, Sarah said, her voice carrying gossipy excitement. 40 guests, private dining room, the works. Whose birthday? Her friend asked. The wife's. But that's not really what it's about. Ethan's finally ready to make the change he's been planning. You know, the situation we've all been waiting for him to handle. They laughed, and my stomach turned as Sarah continued. The poor thing still brings him lunch every Tuesday like some devoted housewife from the 50s. She has no idea what's coming. Everyone at the office knows about Victoria. Victoria. The name hit me like ice water. I kept my breathing steady, my eyes fixed on my phone screen while recording every word. He's really going through with it? her friend asked. Oh, definitely. He's been moving assets for months. By the time she figures it out, there won't be anything left to fight over. Princeton boys always protect their money. They kept talking, but I'd heard enough. I paid for my untouched sandwich and left, my phone burning in my pocket with evidence of my scheduled destruction. I walked for an hour through Arlington's streets, letting the September air clear my head as pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. The deleted texts, the early morning meetings with Nathan Brooks, the restructuring documents, and now this Victoria person everyone seemed to know about except me. That evening, I texted Emily Harper, my friend from MIT who now worked in financial forensics. We hadn't spoken in 2 years, but she responded immediately, suggesting we meet at a bar in Alexandria the next night. The place she chose was perfect, a dive bar near the waterfront where bankers and their wives would never venture. Emily looked the same, her red hair in the messy bun she'd worn through graduate school. She hugged me tightly, then studied my face. You look like someone who's discovered their house is built on quicksand, she said, ordering us both whiskeys. I told her everything. The documents, the overheard conversation, Ethan's behavioral changes, the systematic erasure of my contributions to Pinnacle. Emily listened without interrupting, nodding as she recognized patterns. Lauren, this isn't just a divorce setup, she said, sliding her business card across the scarred wooden table. This is asset stripping and strategic positioning. He's not just planning to leave you, he's planning to leave you with nothing while making it look like you never contributed anything. She pulled out her tablet, showing me similar cases she'd investigated. Men like Ethan don't just walk away, they scorch the earth. They destroy what they leave behind to ensure their narrative is the only one that survives. Emily's words echoed in my mind during the drive home to Bethesda. Men like Ethan don't just leave, they destroy what they leave behind. I gripped the steering wheel tighter as I pulled into our garage at 11 p.m., finding Ethan passed out on the leather couch in his study, 3 empty Scotch glasses on the side table. Princeton reunion planning committee papers were scattered across his chest, rising and falling with his snoring. This had become his Thursday night ritual, drinking with his college buddies over video calls, reliving their glory days while plotting their continued dominance in the financial world. I stood in the doorway, studying him. Even unconscious, he maintained that air of entitlement, his mouth slightly open, one hand loosely holding his phone. The screen lit up with a notification from Victoria, no last name in his contacts, like she was already intimate enough to need no further identification. I left him there and grabbed my laptop, heading to the guest bathroom at the far end of the house. It sounds absurd, working from a bathroom, but it was the only room I could lock without raising questions if Ethan woke up. I lowered the toilet lid, balanced my laptop on it, and sat on the edge of the bathtub with a notepad. If I was going to protect myself from Ethan's planned destruction, I needed to build something stronger than his Princeton network. I needed to become invisible in the same way he'd been making me invisible, but with purpose. The first step was creating Artemis Holdings. I'd learned about offshore structuring while helping the Carters minimize their tax obligations, setting up their shells in Delaware and holdings in the Caymans. Now I used that knowledge for my protection. Each entity looked legitimate on paper, with proper documentation and registration numbers that would pass casual scrutiny. Bermuda for the main holding company, Cayman subsidiaries for the investment arms, and a Delaware LLC to interface with U.S. operations. By 3 a.m., I had 7 interconnected companies existing only in legal documents and encrypted servers, all controlled by me through passwords Ethan would never suspect. The opportunity to weaponize this structure came sooner than expected. That Sunday, at the Carter estate for dinner, Ethan's father complained about the mortgage rates on their Annapolis property. Highway robbery, Carter Sr. grumbled over his second martini. 7% on a jumbo loan. Even with our credit score, these banks have no respect anymore. I looked up from my barely touched salmon, an idea forming with crystalline clarity. You know, some of my MIT alumni have started an investment fund. They're looking for stable, low-risk opportunities, real estate-backed loans to established families, that sort of thing. Evelyn Carter's eyebrows rose slightly, the first time she'd shown interest in anything I'd said in months. Really? What kind of terms? Much better than bank. Rates, maybe 4.5%, flexible payment schedules. They prefer to work with people they can trust. I kept my voice casual, cutting another piece of salmon. I could make an introduction if you'd like. Within a week, I was orchestrating the deal of a lifetime. The investment partners I'd invented had impressive backgrounds fabricated from LinkedIn profiles and Harvard Business School directories. I created email addresses, phone numbers that forwarded to burner phones, and had a friend from MIT pose as a partner for a brief call with Carter's lawyer. The documentation was flawless, pages of standard lending language any attorney would recognize. But buried in subsection 47C was a paragraph about acceleration clauses tied to material changes in the primary borrower's family relationships. Carter's lawyer, a golf buddy more interested in his fee than due diligence, skimmed it during a rushed Friday afternoon review. Standard stuff, he told Carter Sr. Actually, better terms than I usually see. The $15 million refinancing went through the following week. The Carters celebrated their financial cleverness at dinner, toasting their shrewd negotiation skills while I smiled quietly, knowing they'd handed me a loaded weapon that could destroy them with 7 minutes' notice. But property was just the beginning. The real prize was Pinnacle Capital itself. During scheduled maintenance windows, when the trading systems were offline for updates, I began fragmenting the Pythia algorithm. It was like performing surgery on my own creation, separating components designed to work as an integrated whole. The beauty was in how I structured it. Each piece appeared as a routine update or patch, things Ethan had to approve as part of normal operations. He'd sign the authorization forms I placed on his desk without reading them, usually while on the phone or reviewing portfolios. Just technical stuff, he'd mutter, scrawling his signature while thinking about his next meeting. What he was signing were licensing agreements between Pinnacle Capital and various Artemis Holdings subsidiaries. The neural network components were licensed from one entity, the predictive modeling from another, the data processing protocols from a third. Individually, these agreements looked like standard vendor relationships. Together, they meant Pinnacle Capital no longer owned the technology that made it valuable. They were renting their own brain from me, and the rental agreement had specific terms about what happened if payments stopped or contracts were breached. The final piece involved Ethan's sisters. Olivia and Chloe had always treated me like the help, but they were happy to accept my assistance with their trust funds. During a family dinner, when they complained about tax implications on their distributions, I offered to restructure their trusts for better efficiency. "You know about this stuff?" Olivia asked, her surprise borderline insulting. "I've picked up a few things," I said modestly, not mentioning my doctorate included extensive financial modeling coursework. The restructuring I proposed looked brilliant on paper. Better tax treatment, higher yields, more flexible access to funds. What they didn't notice was that their father had to sign as guarantor for certain obligations, intrinsically linked to his property loans through a web of cross-default provisions. One domino fell, and they all would. "You're so sweet to help us," Chloe said, air kissing my cheek after signing the papers. "Especially considering your background." My background, as if growing up middle class in Indiana was a disease I should apologize for. I smiled, accepting their condescension. knowing their signatures had completed the financial architecture that would bring their world crashing down when I pulled the trigger. By the time I finished building my avalanche, it was invisible but omnipresent, woven through every aspect of their financial lives like a virus waiting to activate. 3 weeks had passed since I'd completed the financial architecture of my revenge, and the weight of carrying this secret alone was starting to crack my carefully maintained facade. That's when my mother called to say she was visiting. She'd booked her flight without asking, announcing she'd stay for the weekend. Ethan rolled his eyes when I told him, muttering about enduring Indiana wisdom while he had important networking to do. Mom arrived on a Friday afternoon while Ethan was at the office. When I opened the door, she took one long look at me and pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than usual. She felt thinner than I remembered, but her arms were still strong, capable of holding me together when I felt like falling apart. She didn't comment on the house, the expensive furniture, or the status symbols Ethan insisted we display. She just studied my face with those sharp brown eyes that always saw through me. "You've lost weight," she said, setting down her worn duffel bag in our marble foyer. "I've been busy," I replied, leading her to the kitchen. We made small talk while I prepared tea, discussing her book club and her neighbor's new grandson. But when Ethan's BMW pulled into the driveway earlier than expected, my whole body tensed. Mom noticed immediately how I straightened my spine, smoothed my hair, and checked my appearance in the microwave's reflection. Ethan breezed in, gave my mother a perfunctory kiss on the cheek that barely made contact, and announced he had a golf weekend with clients. He'd be leaving early Saturday morning and returning Sunday night. The relief I felt at his departure must have shown, because Mom reached across the counter and squeezed my hand as soon as his car disappeared down the street. Saturday morning, after Ethan left at dawn for his golf outing, Mom made scrambled eggs and toast while I sat at the kitchen table in my pajamas for the first time in years. The morning sun streamed through the windows, and for a moment, I felt like I was back in our old kitchen in Indiana, before Ethan, before Pinnacle, before I learned to make myself small. "How long has he been this cruel?" Mom asked suddenly, not looking up from the eggs she was plating. The question hit me unexpectedly, and tears sprang to my eyes before I could stop them. "I don't know what you mean." She turned to face me, her expression soft but determined. "Sweetheart, I watched you flinch when his car pulled up yesterday. You checked your appearance 3 times before he walked through the door. You apologized for the brand of tea in your own home. So, I'm asking again. How long?" The dam broke. Through choking sobs, I told her everything: the systematic erasure from Pinnacle, the Princeton Boys Club that replaced me, the overheard conversations about Victoria, the divorce planning I discovered. Mom listened without interrupting, occasionally squeezing my hand or pushing tissues across the table. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Your father had a first wife before me," she said finally. "She waited too long to leave, kept thinking things would get better, that he'd change. By the time she got out, she'd lost everything. Not just money, but herself." She stood and pulled me to my feet. "Come on, we're packing you a go bag just in case." We spent the afternoon filling a small suitcase with essentials: clothes, copies of important documents I'd been gathering, cash I'd been withdrawing in small amounts. Mom helped me hide it behind old skiing equipment in the basement storage room, a place Ethan never ventured. "When you're ready to leave," she said, "call me. Day or night, I'll be here." The Tuesday after Mom left, the doorbell rang. A delivery driver stood there with an elaborate bouquet of peonies, soft pink and white ones that must have cost a fortune. I'd mentioned years ago that peonies were my least favorite flower, gaudy and overblown to me, but apparently someone else loved them. The card was small, cream-colored with gold edges. "Can't wait for your freedom, V." My hands trembled as I carried the bouquet inside. This wasn't meant for me. The delivery driver had made a mistake. Or maybe this was exactly the mistake I needed to see. I found the florist's card and called, affecting a cheerful voice. "Hi, I just received a beautiful bouquet, but I want to make sure the standing order is correct for next week." "Oh yes, Mrs. Carter," the florist chirped. "Mr. Carter's weekly arrangement for Ms. Victoria Ramsey. Should we continue delivering to the Fairmont Hotel downtown, Suite 1247? That's perfect. Same time every Tuesday at 2 p.m. as usual. He's been so consistent for the past 6 months. Ms. Ramsey is lucky to have such a devoted friend." 6 months. While I'd been trying to save our marriage, he'd been sending another woman peonies every week at the hotel, where he supposedly had client meetings. Suite 1247. I wrote it down with a steady hand, though inside, I was screaming. 2 weeks later, Ethan insisted I accompany him to the Princeton alumni dinner. "We need to present a united front," he said, not noticing the irony. He positioned me at the wives' table in the corner while he held court with potential investors near the bar. I sat between a plastic surgeon's third wife and a hedge fund manager's girlfriend who couldn't have been older than 21. Both discussed vacation homes while I pushed salmon around my plate. Then I heard Ethan's voice carrying across the room. Someone had asked about Pinnacle's algorithm, and Ethan was explaining my work, down to the specific mathematical models I developed during my doctorate. He even used my exact phrases from our early morning discussions years ago when we'd been partners in more than name. I forced myself to smile and nod when the plastic surgeon's wife asked if I was proud of my husband's success. Across the room, I caught the eye of Michael Sullivan, my old MIT professor who'd advised my dissertation. He was standing near the bar, and the look he gave me was one of complete understanding. He knew exactly whose work Ethan was describing. He raised his water glass slightly in my direction, a silent acknowledgement of the truth we both knew, but couldn't speak in this room full of Ethan's allies. The next day, I drove to the storage unit I'd rented under one of my Artemis Holdings LLCs in Fairfax. Inside, I'd created a command center. Bankers' boxes lined the walls, each carefully labeled, containing different aspects of my evidence. Financial documents showing the systematic removal of my name from patents and contracts. Printed emails between Ethan and his lawyer discussing the cleanest exit strategy. The recorded conversation from the cafe where Sarah laughed about my ignorance. I spent hours setting up automated triggers to execute everything simultaneously once activated. Each envelope was prepared, sealed, and labeled. One for the SEC with evidence of Ethan's misrepresentation to investors, one for Carter Sr.'s mortgage company with the acceleration notice, one for Georgetown's financial aid office freezing the trust funds, and one for Ethan containing just 7 lines spelling out how his empire depended on systems he'd never bothered to understand. I locked the storage unit and drove home with the sealed envelope in my laptop bag. Tonight was my 31st birthday, though Ethan hadn't mentioned it once that morning. Instead, he'd reminded me twice about dinner at Antonio's, insisting I be ready by 7 sharp. The pretense of celebration while planning my public execution would have been laughable if it weren't so cruel. When I arrived home at 4:30, Ethan was already there, standing in our bedroom with 3 dresses laid out on the bed. His presence in our closet, handling my clothes, felt like a violation. He held up a red cocktail, dress I'd worn to last year's company Christmas party, studying it with the critical eye of someone selecting props for a performance. "Wear something sophisticated tonight," he said without looking at me. "Not that black thing you always default to. We'll have important people there." I picked up the simple black sheath dress from my side of the closet, the one he'd dismissed. It was elegant in its simplicity, bought with my own money before we were married, from a time when I dressed for myself. "I think I'll wear this one." He turned to face me, his jaw tightening the way it did when I defied him in small ways. "Lauren, I just said, it's my birthday dinner, isn't it?" I interrupted, meeting his gaze steadily. "I should wear what makes me comfortable." Something flickered across his face. Surprise. Maybe calculation. He hadn't expected pushback. Not tonight, when he thought I was walking blindly into his trap. He shrugged and turned back to his side of the closet, pulling out his navy Armani suit. I sat at my vanity, applying makeup while he dressed, watching him in the mirror as he fastened his cufflinks, new, platinum with small sapphires that caught the light. I'd never seen them before, but I recognized the Cartier jewelry box on his dresser, the same store where Victoria Ramsey had posted Instagram photos last month. I'd looked her up after discovering the peonies. "Those are beautiful cufflinks," I said, applying mascara with a steady hand. "A gift from a client," he replied too quickly, not meeting my eyes in the mirror. "For closing the Henderson deal." The Henderson deal had closed 3 months ago, but I didn't point that out. Instead, I reached into my laptop bag and transferred the black envelope to my evening purse, feeling its weight like a loaded weapon. The automated triggers were set to activate at 8:47 p.m. exactly, synchronized to execute the moment I handed him the envelope. 7 minutes from that moment, his world would begin collapsing. The drive to Antonio's took 20 minutes through evening traffic. Ethan spent it on his phone, texting rapidly while I watched the city lights blur past. At one point, he chuckled at something on his screen, and I caught a glimpse of Sarah's name before he angled the phone away. They were probably coordinating the final details of my humiliation. Antonio's occupied the top floor of a boutique hotel in downtown Arlington, its private dining room a study in calculated luxury. When the elevator doors opened, I could hear voices and laughter from behind the frosted glass doors. Ethan placed his hand on my lower back, guiding me forward like a lamb to slaughter. The room was packed with 40 guests, and my stomach twisted as I recognized the faces. Every single person from Ethan's world. His Princeton buddies, his Pinnacle Capital partners, their wives and girlfriends who lunched at the same exclusive clubs and vacationed in Cape Cod. Not one of my friends was there, not even acquaintances from my MIT alumni network. This wasn't a birthday celebration, it was a curated audience for Ethan's performance. The seating arrangement confirmed it. Ethan's place card sat at the head of the table, commanding the room. Mine was at the far end, isolated like an afterthought. The real revelation was the place card to Ethan's right. Victoria Ramsey, printed in the same elegant calligraphy as the others. She was already there, wearing a white dress that highlighted her blonde hair, laughing at something Nathan Brooks was saying. She looked up when we entered, her eyes meeting mine for a fraction of a second before sliding away. "Happy birthday, Lauren," Evelyn Carter said, air kissing my cheek with lips that barely moved. Her smile was the kind you'd give someone at a funeral, full of pity and uncomfortable acknowledgement. I took my seat at the far end, surrounded by the younger wives, who immediately began discussing their Pilates instructor. The champagne flowed, glasses constantly refilled by attentive waitstaff. I noticed people glancing at me, then looking away when I caught their eyes. Sarah actually smirked when our gazes met, lifting her glass in a mock toast. The dinner progressed with painful predictability. 7 courses of elaborate food I couldn't taste, accompanied by wines Ethan selected to impress his audience. He held court at his end of the table, telling stories about deals and conquests, while Victoria touched his arm and laughed at all the right moments. By the time the dessert course arrived, an elaborate chocolate soufflé with a single candle, the room buzzed with anticipation. Ethan stood, tapping his crystal glass with a silver spoon. The chatter died immediately, all eyes turning to him as he commanded the room's attention. He looked confident, powerful, every inch the successful man he'd always wanted to be. His smile was the coldest thing I'd ever seen. "Before we toast to Lauren's birthday," he began, his voice carrying the tone of someone about to deliver a punchline, "I have an announcement to make." The room held its breath. I felt 40 pairs of eyes shifting between Ethan and me, waiting for the blow to land. "Congratulations, failure," he said, looking directly at me. "We're done." The laughter erupted like champagne from a shaken bottle, explosive and effervescent. His Princeton brothers raised their glasses, cheering like they'd witnessed a winning touchdown. The wives tittered behind manicured hands, while Victoria actually applauded, her white dress making her look like a bride at her own rehearsal dinner. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't give them the devastation they'd paid admission to see. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out the black envelope, standing slowly and walking the length of the table with measured steps. The laughter faded as they watched me approach Ethan with something they hadn't expected: complete composure. I slid the envelope across the marble table toward him, my voice perfectly steady. "Before you celebrate, you should probably explain to your sisters why their tuition vanishes, to your parents why their house and cars disappear in minutes, and to your partners why the company collapses before dessert is served." The silence was absolute. Ethan's triumphant smile wavered as he looked at the envelope, then back at me. His hand hesitated before picking it up, and I saw the first crack in his confidence. "Enjoy the soufflé," I said, turning and walking toward the door. "You have about 7 minutes." Behind me, I heard the tear of paper as Ethan opened the envelope. I was already at the elevator when the first phone started buzzing, then another, then dozens, as the automated triggers I'd programmed began their synchronized destruction. The elevator doors closed on the sound of Carter Sr.'s voice shouting about his lawyer. I walked through Antonio's lobby and out into the cool night air, my heels clicking on the pavement as I made my way to my Tesla parked across the street. Inside, I opened my laptop and watched the dashboards I'd configured light up with confirmation messages, the loan acceleration notices, the system lockdowns, the trust fund freezes, every domino falling exactly as planned. Through Antonio's floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the chaos erupting in the private dining room. Ethan was frantically tearing open the envelope while his father pushed through the crowd toward the balcony, phone already pressed to his ear. Through my Tesla's windshield, I watched Carter Sr. pace back and forth, his free arm waving wildly as he shouted at whoever answered his call at this hour. Evelyn Carter had knocked over an entire tray of champagne glasses in her rush to reach her phone, the crystal shattering across Antonio's marble floor like scattered diamonds. The sound must have been tremendous, though I couldn't hear it from across the street. I started the car and drove to my Alexandria townhouse, purchased through Artemis Holdings 14 months earlier. Ethan never knew about this place, thinking I spent my occasional nights away at my mother's apartment or budget hotels when I claimed to need space. The 3-story building sat on a quiet, tree-lined street in Old Town, far enough from Arlington's financial district that no one from Ethan's circle would stumble upon it. This was my sanctuary, furnished simply but comfortably with pieces I chose myself, paid for with consulting fees Ethan never knew I'd earned by reviewing code for startups under a pseudonym. Inside, I set my laptop on the kitchen table and opened the monitoring dashboards. The number of missed calls on my phone had reached 47, but I turned it to silent and placed it face down. The real story unfolded on my screen in real-time data streams and system logs, painting a picture of complete operational collapse. Pinnacle Capital's primary trading platform went dark at exactly 8:54 p.m., 7 minutes after I handed Ethan the envelope. The backup systems attempted to engage but found themselves locked behind biometric authentication they couldn't bypass. Client portals displayed error messages in languages that cycled randomly, Mandarin to Swedish to Arabic. A small touch I added because I could. Nathan Brooks sent increasingly frantic emails to the development team, each more desperate, demanding someone explain why he had no administrative access to systems he supposedly controlled. Emily sent encrypted updates every few hours. The Carter estate in Annapolis received notice of immediate loan acceleration. The mortgage company was initiating foreclosure proceedings that would have the property in receivership within 10 days, unless $14 million appeared immediately. Georgetown's financial aid office froze Olivia and Chloe's accounts after their trust fund payments reversed. Both sisters were locked out of their student portals, unable to access grades, transcripts, or university email accounts. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my living room, surrounded by the blessed silence of a space that belonged entirely to me. No performing, no pretending, no walking on eggshells wondering what mood Ethan would bring home. The irony wasn't lost on me. In destroying their world, I'd found peace in mine. For 3 days, I maintained this silence, watching their empire crumble through data points and system failures, while ignoring the increasingly desperate voicemails filling my phone. On the morning of the 4th day, my doorbell rang at 6:43 a.m. Through the security camera, I saw Ethan standing on my townhouse steps. He looked like a different person from the man who'd stood triumphantly at Antonio's 72 hours earlier. His Armani suit was wrinkled and stained, the same one from the party. His Princeton class ring was absent, likely pawned for quick cash. His designer stubble had grown into an unkempt beard, and his eyes had the hollow look of someone who hadn't slept in days. I opened the door but didn't invite him in, letting him stand on the step while I remained in my doorway, coffee mug in hand. The morning was crisp, and I noticed him shivering slightly in his wrinkled suit jacket. "Please," he said, the words seeming to physically hurt him, coming out cracked and foreign, like his mouth had never formed those syllables before. This man, who had commanded boardrooms and dominated conversations, couldn't meet my eyes as he stood on my doorstep like a beggar. "Please, what, Ethan?" I asked, taking a sip of my coffee. "The company is gone. Everything is frozen. My parents are losing their house. Olivia and Chloe can't graduate. The SEC is investigating me personally for misrepresentation of technological assets to investors." His voice broke on the last word. "Just tell me what you want. Tell me how to fix this." "You can't fix this," I replied simply. "You can only live with the consequences of your choices, just as you expected me to live with mine." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. "My lawyer said to give you this." The letterhead from Turner and Associates was impressive, as was the thickness of the packet. 23 pages of legal threats claiming extortion, theft of trade secrets, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and other creative interpretations of criminal law. I smiled as I flipped through it, recognizing the desperate language of attorneys with no case but needing to justify their retainer. "You should go," I told Ethan, starting to close the door. "This isn't over," he said, finding a spark of his old arrogance. "My lawyers will destroy you." That afternoon, I forwarded the Turner and Associates packet to Margaret Ellison, my attorney at Ellison Legal. Margaret was brilliant, ruthless, and had been preparing for this scenario for months. Within 2 hours, she crafted a response, including documentation proving I owned every line of code Pinnacle Capital relied upon. She attached the audio recording from the cafe, where Sarah discussed Ethan's plan to cut me out completely once the investors were secured, and emails between Ethan and Nathan Brooks planning my termination. Every threat Turner and Associates made became evidence of Ethan's attempted theft of my intellectual property. 2 days later, my doorbell rang again. The security camera showed Victoria Ramsey standing on my steps, wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her blonde hair in a ponytail. Gone was the white dress and perfect makeup from Antonio's. She looked younger, more vulnerable, and surprisingly nervous. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "I'm not here as Ethan's anything," she said quickly. "I'm here because I've been gathering evidence of his fraudulent dealings with my clients' portfolios. He's been using my position at Morgan Stanley to access insider information." She held out a flash drive. "Everything is on here. Trade records, emails, recorded conversations where he explicitly discusses using material non-public information." I studied her for a moment. "Why would you give this to me?" "Because he destroyed my career the same way he tried to destroy yours. The only difference is, you saw it coming and fought back." She paused. "I thought perhaps we could work together." I took the flash drive but shook my head. "I appreciate this, but I don't need an alliance. I have everything required to ensure Ethan faces appropriate consequences." I reached into my pocket and handed her a business card. "This is the SEC investigator who's been calling me. He'd be very interested in what you've documented." Victoria took the card, nodded once, and walked away. I closed the door and returned to my laptop, where another dozen system alerts confirmed Ethan's world continued its methodical collapse. I closed the door behind Victoria and returned to my laptop, where Margaret Ellison had sent an email marked urgent. The Pinnacle Capital Board had called an emergency meeting for the next morning at 9 m. They wanted to discuss the technological crisis and had discovered that all roads led back to Artemis Holdings. Margaret had informed them I would attend, not as Ethan's estranged wife, but as the controlling owner of their entire technical infrastructure. The next morning, I dressed in a navy suit purchased specifically for this moment. Not designer, not flashy, just professionally elegant in a way that said I meant business. The Pinnacle Capital offices occupied the 32nd floor of an Arlington high-rise, the same building where I'd once served coffee to investors who looked through me. This time, when I walked through those glass doors, the receptionist's eyes widened in recognition and confusion. The boardroom fell silent when I entered. 7 board members sat around the polished mahogany table, including Ethan, who looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past week. Nathan Brooks was there, his Wharton MBA useless in the face of actual technical complexity. Carter Sr. occupied his usual seat, despite no longer affording the parking garage fee for the building. I didn't take the chair they'd set for me at the far end of the table. Instead, I walked to the presentation screen and connected my laptop with practiced efficiency. The first slide appeared, showing the complete ownership structure of the Pythia algorithm. "Gentlemen," I began, noting how they flinched at my formal address, "you called this meeting to discuss your technological crisis. Let me clarify your position. Every line of code Pinnacle Capital depends upon belongs to Artemis Holdings, which is wholly owned by me. The licensing agreements you've been operating under expired the moment Ethan publicly announced our divorce at Antonio's, triggering the morality clause in subsection 12. I clicked to the next slide, showing the patent filings, all dated and registered under my maiden name, Lauren Brooks, before Pinnacle Capital existed. I created the Pythia algorithm during my doctoral work at MIT. The patents were filed under my maiden name, which is why your due diligence never found them. Board member Daniel Webb, a silver-haired venture capitalist who had always been the most pragmatic of the group, leaned forward. "What do you want?" I smiled and advanced to the next slide. "You have 2 options. Option 1. Recognize me as the founder and majority owner of Pinnacle Capital with 70% equity, based on the valuation of the intellectual property I created. Ethan retains 5%. The board splits the remaining 25%. Option 2. I sell everything to quantum partners for pennies on the dollar, and you explain to your investors why their portfolios are now worthless." "This is extortion," Ethan spat, finding his voice for the first time. No, I replied calmly. This is capitalism. I own something you need. I'm offering to sell it to you at a fair price. The fact that you never secured ownership of your company's fundamental technology is not my problem to solve. The board exchanged glances. They were trapped, and everyone in the room knew it. Without Pythia, Pinnacle Capital was just another investment firm with nice offices and no competitive advantage. We need time to discuss, Webb said carefully. You have 1 hour, I replied, closing my laptop. My attorney is waiting in the lobby with the contracts. Decide quickly, because Quantum Partners is eager to acquire these assets. I spent that hour in a coffee shop across the street, watching as messenger after messenger arrived at the building, likely lawyers and advisors summoned for emergency consultation. When I returned, the contracts were signed. I was now the majority owner of the company I'd built from nothing. 3 days later, the Wall Street Journal published their investigation. The headline stretched across the business section's front page: "The Ghost Genius Who Built and Rebuilt Pinnacle Capital." The reporter, Susan Lee, had done her homework. She interviewed Professor Sullivan from MIT, who confirmed I was the sole creator of the Pythia algorithm. She spoke with former employees who remembered me coding through the night while Ethan attended networking events. The timeline was devastating, showing how each of Pinnacle's major successes corresponded with improvements I made to the algorithm, while my systematic erasure from company records coincided with Ethan bringing in his Princeton network. The article included a photo from my MIT graduation, standing with my doctoral advisor beside a presentation board showing the early framework of Pythia, next to a recent photo of Ethan at an industry conference presenting my work as his own. The contrast was damning. My phone buzzed with interview requests from CNBC, Bloomberg, and Forbes, but I declined them all. The truth was public, and I had more important work to do. I scheduled a meeting with Quantum Partners, not as a desperate seller, but as someone with assets to leverage. We met in their conference room overlooking the National Mall, the same room where Ethan had once pitched them on a partnership they declined. $40 million for the complete Pythia algorithm, I stated simply. Non-exclusive license with a 5-year non-compete clause for the financial sector. They agreed within 10 minutes. The wire transfer was confirmed by lunch. That afternoon, I signed the lease for Athena Financial's offices, 6 floors below where Pinnacle Capital was beginning its death spiral. I'd already recruited my team, Dr. Sarah Okoro, whom the Federal Reserve passed over for promotion 3 times despite her groundbreaking work in monetary policy modeling. Jessica Martinez, whose revolutionary risk assessment algorithms were credited to her male supervisor at Morgan Stanley. Amy Patterson, a coder whose innovations in high-frequency trading made millions for firms that refused to promote her beyond junior developer. As we stood in our new offices looking out at the city skyline, Sarah raised her coffee mug in a toast. To the overlooked and underestimated. While we celebrated our beginning, Ethan was facing his end. The SEC investigation uncovered years of misrepresentation to investors. With Victoria's evidence, they had proof of insider trading. His Princeton partners distanced themselves publicly, claiming they'd been deceived about the technology's origins. Nathan Brooks resigned and returned to consulting. Investors pulled their funds en masse, and within 2 weeks, Pinnacle Capital existed only on paper. Carter Sr. filed for bankruptcy on a Tuesday. The Annapolis estate was sold at auction to cover debts. Evelyn moved in with her sister in Frederick, her social standing destroyed. Olivia and Chloe transferred to state schools, taking jobs at department stores to pay rent on the small apartment they now shared. The Carter dynasty, built on borrowed brilliance and stolen innovation, had crumbled completely. My mother arrived the following week, taking the train from Indiana because she wanted to see everything properly. When she walked into Athena Financial's offices and saw my name on the door as CEO and founder, she stopped and touched the lettering with trembling fingers. "You didn't just survive, baby. You soared," she said, tears streaming down her face. I realized I was crying too, not from sadness or anger, but from something I hadn't felt in years. Pure, uncomplicated pride in what I'd built with my own hands and mind. We stood in Athena Financial's reception area as my team prepared for our first major client presentation. The energy was electric, unlike the suffocating atmosphere at Pinnacle where everyone performed for Ethan's approval. Here, Sarah was explaining her monetary policy model to Jessica, who was incorporating it into her risk assessment framework. Amy had 3 monitors displaying code that would revolutionize how we processed market data. We were collaborating, building on each other's ideas, creating something greater than the sum of our parts. The client presentation went flawlessly. Hartman Industries signed a 3-year contract worth $2 million annually, specifically citing their confidence in working with the actual creator of the Pythia algorithm rather than someone who took credit for it. By the end of our first month, Athena Financial's returns exceeded Pinnacle's best quarter by 30%. We weren't just succeeding, we were setting new industry standards. Word spread quickly through the financial sector. 3 more brilliant women reached out, each with stories similar to mine. Dr. Lisa Chang, whose quantitative models generated millions for her previous firm while she remained stuck in middle management. Rebecca Torres, a Harvard MBA whose strategic innovations were consistently presented by male colleagues as their own. Maria Petrov, whose coding brilliance built entire trading platforms while being paid half what junior male developers earned. I hired them all. Our office expanded to include the entire floor, and the atmosphere was unlike anything I'd experienced in corporate America. We shared ideas openly, credited each other's contributions meticulously, and celebrated successes as a team. There was no hierarchy of whose voice mattered more, no performance of authority, just brilliant minds working toward a common goal. 6 months after Athena's launch, I attended the Financial Innovation Conference in San Francisco. Not as someone's +1 or administrative support, but as a keynote speaker. The organizers had requested I present on algorithmic trading in the new economy. Backstage, adjusting my microphone and wearing a simple black dress I chose myself, I saw him across the convention floor. Ethan was manning a booth for Brennan and Associates, a third-tier firm handling small municipal bonds. His Tom Ford suits were replaced by off-the-rack polyester that pulled slightly at the shoulders. His Princeton class ring was still absent, and his hair had started thinning in a way expensive treatments could no longer hide. He was explaining something to a potential client who looked thoroughly unimpressed, desperately trying to project the authority he once wore naturally. Our eyes met across the crowded convention floor. For a moment, time paused. I saw recognition flash across his face, followed by something I never thought I'd see from Ethan Carter: shame. He looked away first, turning his back as if suddenly fascinated by the display materials behind him. The man who called me a failure in front of 40 people couldn't face the woman who'd rebuilt herself from the ashes of his betrayal. I delivered my keynote to a standing ovation. The audience of 500 industry professionals listened as I explained the next evolution of algorithmic trading, innovations far beyond what Pythia had accomplished. During the Q&A, someone asked about my journey from MIT to founding Athena Financial. I told the truth simply, without bitterness, about how being erased from my own creation taught me the importance of ownership, documentation, and never allowing anyone to diminish your contributions. After the conference, I used $10 million from the Quantum Partners sale to establish the Artemis Foundation. The name was deliberate, a reminder that justice sometimes comes from unexpected places. The foundation would provide funding, mentorship, and legal support for women whose technological contributions had been stolen, erased, or appropriated. Professor Michael Sullivan from MIT agreed to serve on the board, helping identify candidates whose brilliance was being overlooked. Our first grant went to a programmer in Portland, whose machine learning innovations had been patented under her supervisor's name. The second went to a team of 3 women, whose startup was destroyed by a hostile takeover that claimed their technology as pre-existing intellectual property. Within 6 months, we were supporting 27 women across the country, each building something extraordinary from the ruins of what was taken from them. One evening, as I stood in my office overlooking the Potomac River, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I knew immediately it was Ethan, likely using a new phone after his previous one was disconnected for non-payment. The message was short: "You destroyed everything." I took a photo of Athena Financial's latest success, a Forbes feature naming us one of the top 10 most innovative financial firms in America, and sent it as my reply. Then I deleted and blocked his number, feeling the last thread connecting us finally sever. He was right, in a way. I'd destroyed everything built on lies, theft, and the systematic erasure of my contributions. But from that destruction, I'd built something infinitely better. I called my mother, who answered on the first ring, as always. "Mom, I've been looking at apartments near me. There's a beautiful 2-bedroom in my building with a view of the river. It has a reading nook perfect for your book club meetings over video." Her sharp intake of breath told me everything. "Lauren, I couldn't afford—" "Mom, I can afford it. We can afford it. You supported me through everything. Let me give something back." As she cried happy tears on the other end, I looked at my reflection in the darkened window. The woman staring back wasn't the invisible wife who'd served coffee while others claimed her work, nor the victim publicly humiliated at her own birthday dinner. She was someone who'd taken the worst moment of her life and transformed it into the foundation for something extraordinary. The best revenge, I realized, wasn't just reclaiming what was stolen or watching those who wronged you fall. It was building something so magnificent that their betrayal became a mere footnote in your success story. Ethan thought he'd ended my story that night at Antonio's. Instead, he'd freed me to write a better one, surrounded by brilliant women who understood that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to remain invisible. My phone buzzed with emails from potential clients, partnership offers, and interview requests. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to grow Athena Financial into something even greater. But tonight, I stood in my office, watching the lights of Arlington twinkle below, finally at peace with the journey that brought me here. This story of calculated revenge kept you glued to every word. Hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Lauren slid that black envelope across the marble table at Antonio's, knowing she'd triggered 7 minutes of total financial destruction. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more gripping stories like this.